Hey! I wanted to show you guys something I've been working on all quarter. It is a project for a speech that I'm about to give today, and it means a lot to me, so I wanted y'all to know what's going on at Evergreen State College. I did my project on neuroplasticity. Specifically, I wanted to examine the role neuroplasticity can take in treating depression. There are several reasons why I chose this topic. First off is I've always been interested in neurobiology, especially the role it can play in both treating and causing mental illness. Another reason I chose this topic is because of my interest in the mind-body connection. As I see it, our brain's plastic potential to heal itself is a wonderful example of this connection at work. We can tangibly see how our mental activities, our mind, can influence our bodily organs, and in this case, the brain. As we have learned, neuroplasticity is defined as our brain's capacity to change via environmental input and through our own thoughts, actions, and behaviors. Through these methods, our brain can alter synaptic connections, physiologically and molecularly change, and, as we saw in the brain that changes itself, it can alter the size and location of regions that correspond to specific mental and physical activities. It is theorized that both psychotherapy and antidepressants can facilitate the neuroplastic change needed to overcome depression. In this presentation, I aim to discuss the treatment for depression by examining a biomedical and psychological theories on neuroplasticity. I also want to touch on some neuroplastic changes observed in subjects either taking antidepressants or receiving therapy. Before examining these two modalities, I think it's important to review the two main brain structures that I found to be most targeted for neuroplastically treating depression. Coincidentally, these are also structures identified whose malfunctions are believed to correlate with depression. Hey! Let's start off with the brain structure, the hippocampus. The hippocampus is part of the limbic system, which is the part of our brain most associated with the direction of emotions and behaviors. In specific, the function of the hippocampus is the formation and storage of memories. It also functions to connect memories to emotions. In depressed people, it is observed that the hippocampus has a decreased volume, as well as it displays a decrease in dendrite growth. Dendrites are the structure on the neurons that look like little fingers. They're right above the cell body and allow it to receive messages from other neurons. A decrease of dendrite growth indicates an overall abnormal neural activity within the structure. The malfunction of the hippocampus in depression can be observed in that people with depression have a symptom of lack of memory or memory loss. The other structure the neuroplastic solution to depression focuses on is the prefrontal cortex. Hey, it's right in the front there. The prefrontal cortex is believed to play a role in the experience of emotional and complex behaviors. In depressed people, the prefrontal cortex is observed to have a high metabolism, which means a high energy or activity and indicates an overall abnormal activity within the structure. It is also observed to contain a lower than average amount of neuron-nourishing cells within the brain. And just like the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex in depressed subjects has been observed to be a smaller size than those in healthy subjects. Now that I have reviewed the targeted brain structures, it's right over there, I want to start off by analyzing the neuroplastic potential of psychotherapy. The theory that therapy can induce neuroplastic change rests on a neuroplastic memory model. According to the brain that changes itself, The memory model means that as we learn in therapy, neurons alter structure and connections because therapy provides a stimulus that leaves lasting memory traces. The memory model of therapy focuses specifically on the implicit memory system. The implicit memory system is comprised of unconscious, latent memories that are usually ingrained in our psyche during stages in childhood when our brain is particularly plastic. Implicit memories are thought to be the origins of emotional memory. They play a role in influencing our emotional behavior towards people, events, and ideas that we unconsciously associate with past experiences. Explorative learning in therapy is thought to alter neural activity in the pathways of the implicit memory system. In therapy, this is done by revealing and reflecting upon implicit cognitive patterns that may perpetuate depression. Now, through a neurological lens, learning new cognitive patterns weakens the faulty implicit neurological connections that are believed to cause depression. There are several types of therapy that are believed to be effective catalysts for neuroplastic change. The first one is cognitive behavioral therapy, which we're all familiar with. In using this therapy for neuroplastic change, the goal is to change one's thinking and behavior, which through focused attention will lead to changes in brain circuitry. In turn, this neurological change in the brain will reinforce new, healthy change in behavior and thinking, which is kind of like a neuroplastic feedback loop. Another mode to catalyze neuroplastic change is mindfulness therapy. In mindfulness therapy, by increasing awareness and acceptance of one's emotions, it is believed that one can rewire faulty neurological ties. This is done by responding to situations that trigger depression rather than detrimentally reacting to them. Another therapy thought to facilitate neuroplastic change is interpersonal therapy. Interpersonal therapy functions on the belief that interpersonal relations and conflicts greatly affect any existing mental health issues. The therapy aims to treat depression in specific by improving communications and relations to others. Through interpersonal therapy, it is the goal that repeated practice of new ways of thinking and behaving in one's interpersonal relationships can lead to neuroplastic change. To reiterate, there is an overall theme that therapies facilitate neuroplastic change by manipulating the memory and through the repetition of learned new cognitive processes. In this project, I was able to locate the study mentioned in The Brain That Changes Itself, which supports therapy as a mechanism for neuroplastic change. I want everyone to recall that increased metabolic activity in the prefrontal cortex has been correlated with depression. In this study, the baseline metabolic activity in the prefrontal cortex of subjects with depression was compared to the metabolic activity in the prefrontal cortex 12 weeks after interpersonal therapy. As hypothesized, all 24 subjects exhibited a change in metabolic rate in their prefrontal cortex towards normalcy, as displayed by these scans. As you can see in this one, there is increased metabolic activity in the prefrontal cortex. There's a lot of bright colors. There's some red and orange there. And then, after 12 weeks of interpersonal therapy, we can see a decrease in metabolic activity in the prefrontal cortex. There's no activity that's noticeable here, and this one is a lot smaller and a brighter yellow rather than an intense orange. Another study I found examined the changes in neurotransmission in the prefrontal cortex before and after 1 year of psychotherapy. Whereas the depressed subject displayed a lower than average amount of serotonin in their prefrontal cortex, after a year of therapy, the scan showed that the neurotransmission in their PFC rose to perceived normal levels. Now that I have discussed therapy's potential role in treating and facilitating plasticity, I want to overview the theory of neuroplastic change to treat depression through a more biomedical lens. The use of antidepressants to spur neuroplastic change thought to end depression ultimately rejects the imbalanced brain chemical theory as the etiology of depression. Instead, it works on the belief that depression is due to a lack of healthy plasticity in the brain, or faulty hardwiring, if you will. Through this perspective, in treating depression with psychiatric drugs, it is thought that the drug's neurotrophic properties reverse or block the disturbance of structural plasticity in the brain, especially in the parts of the brain associated with emotions. Again, I want to focus on the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. To clarify, the term neurotrophic properties, which I mentioned, means that these antidepressants are thought to aid in the survival and nourishment of neurons. Proponents to the use of antidepressants to facilitate plastic change believe that these drugs stimulate healthy growth of neurons, including dendrite growth. If you will remember, increased dendrite growth in the hippocampus is thought to correlate with depression, so there is some possible legitimacy and reason for this claim. They are also believed to nourish glial cells. Glial cells are cells in the brain that surround the neurons. They supply the nutrients, insulation, and oxygen needed to maintain the healthy functioning of the neurons. Antidepressants are also believed to specifically target the hippocampus for neuroplastic change. They are thought to stimulate an increased production of stem cells in the structure, which leads to the creation of new, healthy neurons. This neurogenesis is thought to strengthen healthy synaptic connections and reverse the faulty hardwiring that is believed to cause depression. I was able to find studies which support the theorized efficacy of antidepressants. In one study, it was shown that after long-term use, which was 6 months or more, of the antidepressant tianeptine, subjects in remission displayed an increase in the volume of their hippocampus, as well as an increase in new brain cells in the structure. Another study I found in support of antidepressants was also mentioned in The Brain That Changes Itself. In this study, it was observed that similar morphological changes in dendrite length were observed in people taking antidepressants and in subjects who underwent other neuroplastic manipulations, like repetitive learning, memorization, or honestly any of the manipulations we saw in The Brain That Changes Itself. Overall, in the study and literature I examined, I found that there is a similarity between structural and neurological changes induced by antidepressants and psychotherapy. As we have seen, both methods are observed to change the brain, whether it's through the creation of new neurons, physical structure alterations, or regulation of neural activity within specific structures of the brain. The only difference I have surmised is that antidepressants work solely on a chemical level, whereas therapy requires mental practice to achieve a similar neuroplastic change. In saying this, however, I think it's really important to keep in mind that, as in all things regarding such new scientific approaches, there needs to be more tests to conclusively prove the efficacy of these modes of neuroplastic change, as well as the theory that depression is due to a lack of healthy structural plasticity. All opinions aside, I was able to connect the neuroplastic change through therapy to an existential philosophy. Through studying existential psychology, we have learned the belief that, above all, it is ourselves who should take responsibility for our own mental health, and that we all have the propensity towards self-actualization. As I see it, through the hard work of achieving neuroplastic change in therapy, one is taking responsibility for their own mental health on a very tangible and neurological level.